Hello everyone, before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from and what time it is there. That helps YouTube keep showing you stories like this one. Now, let's begin. The cruise was supposed to be our new beginning. Just me and my 6-year-old son, Noah, sailing away from the mess that had been our lives for the past year and a half. The divorce had drained me, but this trip was my promise to him that things would get better. I had worked endless hospital shifts, saving every extra dollar in a jar I'd labeled New Beginnings. When we finally boarded in Miami that humid July morning in 2018, I remember staring up at the massive ship and thinking it looked like a city floating on water. 12 shining decks of glass and white metal, packed with pools, restaurants, and enough distractions to keep Noah happy for 7 whole days in the Caribbean. The people around us looked like typical cruise guests, families, older couples, honeymooners snapping selfies at the railings. Noah was bouncing with excitement, holding his tiny backpack with his Nintendo inside, asking every few minutes when we could go on the water slides. The first day was perfect, everything I had hoped for. We explored the ship top to bottom, Noah's eyes wide at the climbing wall, the mini golf course, and the ice cream stand that stayed open past midnight. He stuffed himself with mac and cheese and cake at dinner, and I didn't even nag him about vegetables because he deserved to just be a kid again after everything he'd seen. That night, I tucked him into the bottom bunk of our tiny cabin and stood in the mirror of our closet-sized bathroom. My brown hair already looked sun-touched, and the dark circles under my eyes seemed lighter. For the first time in months, I felt peace. The ship's soft rocking and the hum of the engines lulled us both to sleep. I drifted off thinking about our snorkeling trip in Grand Cayman and how Noah would love seeing the colorful fish. Everything changed the next morning. It started small, a voice over the ship's speakers during breakfast. "Attention passengers. Would young Sofia Martinez please report to guest services on deck 4? Noah was busy drowning his pancakes in syrup while I sipped my coffee, looking out at the blue, endless water. 10 minutes later, another call. "Christopher Johnson, please report to guest services." Christopher Johnson, 8 years old, wearing a blue Captain America shirt. That detail caught my attention. Why mention what he was wearing? I thought maybe the boy was lost and they were helping his parents find him. But then 20 minutes later, another call. Isabella Thompson, 7 years old, last seen near the splash zone on deck 11. A woman sitting next to us with her 3 kids gave a small laugh. "Busy morning for lost kids," she said. I smiled weakly, but something inside me twisted. 12 years working with children in a hospital had given me instincts, and those instincts were uneasy. By lunchtime, they'd called more names. Every one of them was between 5 and 9 years old, always with what they were wearing, where they were last seen. But I never once saw a parent reunited with a missing child. I started watching people more closely. The pool deck was full. Families laughing, kids running with melting ice cream cones, parents sunbathing. But among them, I began to notice others. Crew members who didn't seem to have real jobs. Men in uniform just walking, scanning the crowd. One man stood out, tall, thin, with acne scars on his cheeks. He circled the pool again and again, eyes shifting over the children. His badge looked real, but something about him didn't. When Noah asked if he could go down the slide alone, I said no before I could even think. "Mom, I'm not a baby," he complained. I pulled him closer, telling him we'd go together later. That afternoon, we stopped by the kids' club. Noah wanted to join a treasure hunt. I thought it would be safe. Locked space, sign-in sheet, staff everywhere. While I filled out the form, a man walked up. He was about 40, clean-shaven, wearing a bright yellow staff shirt with a name tag that said, Kevin. But the shirt looked brand new, still creased from packaging, and his tag was pinned crooked. "Hey, buddy," he said to Noah, barely glancing at me. "You here for the treasure hunt? We moved it to the arcade on deck 12. Way cooler prizes. Want me to take you?" Noah's eyes lit up and he stepped forward, but I reacted fast. I grabbed his shoulder hard. "We'll go together," I said sharply. For a split second, the man's friendly look slipped, and I saw irritation, or anger, before the smile returned. "Oh, parents can't come. Insurance policy. But he'll have fun. Promise." The Real Kids Club supervisor, a young woman with a Brazilian accent, frowned. "Kevin? We don't have a Kevin, and the treasure hunt's right here." The man didn't run. He just turned and walked away calmly, vanishing into the maze of hallways before security arrived. They took my report but treated me like I was being paranoid. I locked our cabin door and told Noah to stay inside. He played his game while I sat there shaking. My heart wouldn't slow down. The announcements kept coming. More missing children. I started writing every name and time in my phone. By dinner, there were 14. 14 children called over the PA, and none of them reappeared. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me sit up, listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard low voices outside our door. Cosmo, tomorrow, easier at the port. The Mexican contact. Then footsteps fading. I wanted to open the door but didn't dare leave Noah alone. I sat on the floor between his bunk and the door, gripping my phone, waiting for morning. At breakfast, I asked other parents if they'd noticed the announcements. Most hadn't, but one mother, a pediatrician from Dallas, had. She whispered that her daughter heard from a staff team that security had been reviewing footage. 3 kids seen leaving the ship at Nassau with adults who weren't their parents. The staff claimed it was a custody issue, but none of those parents ever reported missing kids. My blood went cold. It wasn't random. The announcements were signals, messages to someone on board. This ship wasn't safe. Jennifer and I exchanged numbers, agreeing to watch each other's children, but I already knew we were trapped. That night, we didn't leave our room. I told Noah I felt sick. We watched movies and ate room service. Still, the names kept coming. Every announcement was another child disappearing. The next morning, I gave in to Noah's begging to go for breakfast early. The dining hall was nearly empty when I saw him again, the acne-scarred man from before, this time wearing a waiter's uniform, watching us from near the juice table. When he started walking toward us, smiling, my stomach dropped. I grabbed Noah's hand, but another man blocked our way, pretending to hand Noah a toy he'd dropped. It wasn't his, a distraction. I looked behind me and saw the fake Kevin by the door. They were closing in. Panic took over. I screamed, not just for help, but loud, wild, the kind of scream that makes people drop everything. I shoved Noah down, shouting that he was having a seizure. Passengers rushed over, surrounding us, and in that chaos, the men vanished. Medical staff rushed in, and I let them take us to the infirmary. Once the door closed, I broke down and told the doctor everything. She was an older woman named Dr. Whitmore, her face pale as she listened. She told me quietly, "You're not the first. 3 families have left early after similar things." She turned her monitor so I couldn't see the screen. "You'll disembark to Dal. For medical reasons. Security will escort you. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone." 2 real security officers walked us back to our room. I packed fast while they stood guard. Noah kept asking what was wrong. I lied, telling him I was sick. We were taken down through metal corridors, far below the guest decks, until we reached a crew exit. A van waited there. Before I got in, one of the guards whispered, "Delete your photos. Don't post anything. These people have connections everywhere." His fear was real. I held Noah the entire drive to the airport, too afraid to let go. We flew home that night. The cruise line refunded everything without a word, which said it all. I reported what happened to the FBI, but they only thanked me and said they were aware of situations in international waters. That was it. Jennifer, the other mother, texted once that they made it home, then her number stopped working. I never found any trace of the kids whose names were called. I search for them sometimes, Sophia Martinez, Christopher Johnson, but nothing ever shows up. It's like they never existed. Noah barely remembers the trip now, but I do. I remember the faces, the uniforms that didn't fit, the way those men hunted among crowds without fear, and every time I hear a lost child's name over a loudspeaker in a mall or park, my whole body goes cold, because I can't help but look around, wondering if someone's watching, smiling too much, wearing a uniform that doesn't belong. The Atlantic was rougher than usual that September, and most passengers had gone to their cabins before everything turned strange. I'd been on that mid-sized ship for 3 days, traveling from New York to Southampton. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable enough. My small cabin on deck 7 had a fogged window that never cleared from the mix of ocean air and warm heat inside. After 8 years with Boston PD and another 2 running my own security business, I thought I'd seen it all. My sister, Dee, forced me onto this trip after my divorce, saying I needed a break from watching security footage and worrying about other people's problems. She was right. The first few days were easy, lazy hours, bad comedy shows, quiet drinks, watching the horizon sway. Everything changed on the 3rd night around 11:30 inside the main lounge. I was sitting at the bar, sipping bourbon, watching the young Romanian bartender juggle drink orders when shouting broke out near the casino entrance. Two men were arguing, both in expensive clothes that didn't quite fit right. The larger man, with shoulders stretching his blazer, shoved the smaller one hard. It wasn't just anger, it looked staged, practiced. The smaller guy stumbled into a table of women playing cards, knocking over drinks and scattering poker chips across the floor. Then I noticed something that made every instinct from my police days go off like sirens. 3 men in different spots around the lounge stood up at the exact same time. They didn't look surprised or scared like the rest of the crowd. They were calm, focused, moving toward the fight with purpose, as if they'd practiced it. The next minute was chaos, while everyone's attention stayed glued to the 2 men shouting. Those 3 who'd stood up suddenly pulled out knives. Not ordinary ones, ceramic blades, the kind that slip right past metal detectors. One of them, a thin man with a shaved head and a long scar running from his ear to his jaw, rushed straight for the table where the women had been playing cards, grabbing their purses and jewelry. Another went behind the bar where Anton, the bartender, stood frozen in shock, and the third moved toward the main exit, blocking it. The bigger man from the fight suddenly had a knife too, pressing it to the smaller man's throat while digging through his pockets. That's when I realized the smaller man wasn't random. His watch was a Patek Philippe, worth a fortune, and the diamond on his wedding ring sparkled even under the dim lounge lights. They had picked their victim carefully, probably spotted him earlier flashing money or bragging about his winnings. No one screamed at first. It all happened too fast. I didn't have a gun. Cruise ships don't allow them. But I still carried my tactical pen, an old habit from my time on the force. Without thinking, I stood up and moved toward the man threatening Anton. He had one hand gripping the tip jar and the other waving the blade near the kid's face. I snatched up a heavy glass ashtray from the bar, the kind they still keep even though no one can smoke inside, and slammed it down on his wrist. The sharp crack was loud even over the growing noise. His knife hit the floor, and Anton didn't hesitate. He grabbed a bottle of vodka and smashed it over the man's head, knocking him cold. That's when I messed up. I bent to grab the fallen knife, and when I straightened, the scarred man was already on me, his blade low and steady, like someone trained to use it. The room erupted into panic. People screamed, tables flipped, glass shattered. The scarred man lunged with precision, quick movements that pushed me back toward the windows overlooking the dark, endless ocean. I managed to block a couple of strikes with the knife I'd picked up, but he was fast, experienced. He faked left, then slashed right, slicing my arm open. I felt the sting, the warmth of blood soaking my sleeve, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. Over his shoulder, I saw the big guy dragging the wealthy passenger toward a service door, knife still at his throat, while another stuffed jewelry and wallets into a bag. They moved with perfect rhythm, smooth, organized, professional. I kicked a chair at the scarred man, buying a few seconds to grab a champagne bottle from a nearby table. When he came again, I swung hard, hitting his shoulder and spinning him into the piano. That's when ship security finally shouts it. Wet up. 2 young officers in spotless white uniforms who looked completely unprepared. They froze at the doorway, batons in hand, staring at the chaos like it was a movie scene. The attackers didn't freeze. The one by the exit let out a sharp whistle, a signal, and in seconds they were moving, dropping everything, scattering toward different doors like ghosts. The scarred man rolled off the piano, clutching his arm, then disappeared through a door marked crew only. The big guy shoved his hostage down and slipped through a service corridor. Within 15 seconds, all 5 were gone. What they left behind looked like a war zone, blood on the carpet, shattered glass, people huddled behind overturned furniture, and me standing there with a bleeding arm, gripping a broken champagne bottle. I tried explaining to security this wasn't just a drunken brawl gone bad, it was planned, precise. The medical bay was down on deck 3. Dr. Kovac, a stern Hungarian woman with gray hair tied tight, stitched my arm while I told the head of security what really happened. 20 minutes later, Captain Morrison showed up, half-dressed in his uniform. I laid it all out. The knives, the timing, the escape through crew doors, how they picked their victims. The captain's face went pale when I mentioned the ceramic blades. Those wouldn't show up on scanners, he murmured, like he was realizing something he didn't want to. Dr. Kovac stopped stitching for a second as I described how organized they'd been. I asked how many passengers boarded in New York. Morrison pulled up a tablet and said, 837. We only check passports, no photos. I convinced him to pull security footage from boarding day. For 3 hours, we sat in a cramped office watching grainy videos on outdated monitors. Anton, still shaken but determined, was helping us. He had a sharp eye and spotted them first. So, 5 men who boarded separately, but within half an hour of each other, each carrying the same black duffel bags. They never looked at one another, but it was too perfect to be coincidence. We followed their movements through the next 2 days. They ate at different restaurants, swam in different pools, never together, but Anton noticed something I didn't. All 5 were staying on deck 2, the cheapest rooms, all lined up in the same hallway. "Who books 5 separate interior cabins on a transatlantic trip?" he asked. That's when it clicked. I told Morrison to check the booking records. Every reservation had been made on the same day 6 weeks earlier, all paid for with prepaid cards through different agencies, but with sequential booking numbers. He wanted to raid their cabins immediately, but I stopped him. "If we scare them now," I said, "they'll panic. We're in the middle of the ocean. There's nowhere for the passengers to go." We needed to watch, not rush. Morrison agreed and placed 2 guards outside their hallway, but these guys were smart. For the next 18 hours, none of them left their cabins. No food orders, no sightings. It was like they'd vanished. Then Anton discovered something odd. Someone had been ordering massive late-night meals from the buffet, enough for 15 people, and charging it to a cabin belonging to an elderly couple who were definitely eating elsewhere at the same time. We checked the footage and saw him, the big man from the fight, loading up plates at 2 a.m., then disappearing toward a service elevator. Morrison pulled up the ship's blueprints, tracing that elevator down to a hidden maintenance corridor running behind Deck 2, directly behind the suspect's rooms. My stomach tightened as I followed the map. That corridor led straight to the storage hold, the one where the cruise line kept valuables for safekeeping. The captain went pale. "There's at least $3 million in there," he whispered. That's when we both knew. The attack in the lounge wasn't the real job. It was a test, a way to see how long it took for security to respond, how far they could push before anyone stopped them. The real heist was still coming, and we were already halfway across the Atlantic with nowhere to run. The next stop was still 36 hours away. If they were planning to rob the storage hold, they'd strike right before we reached the Azores, then disappear into those islands before anyone even realized what had happened. We had less than 36 hours to stop them. Morrison wanted to alert the Coast Guard and request an escort, but that would take too long and would tip them off. I told him to let them think they were still in control, but we'd set a trap instead. The plan was dangerous, but simple. We'd move every real valuable out of the storage hold that night, replace everything with fake jewelry and empty boxes, and wait for them to make their move. Morrison hesitated, knowing this could destroy his career if it went wrong, but we both knew there wasn't much choice. That night, while most passengers were busy at the captain's formal dinner, Morrison, Anton, 2 trusted officers, and I worked in silence. We removed everything from the storage hold, diamonds, gold bars, luxury watches, and hid them in the captain's personal safe and 3 locked crew lockers. We photographed each item for proof, while Anton helped us make convincing fakes. He borrowed costume jewelry from the ship's theater, spray-painted rocks to look like gold bars, and filled boxes with casino poker chips. By 4 a.m, the hold looked exactly the same as before, but everything inside it was worthless. Then came the waiting. 28 long hours passed, and nothing happened. No movement from their cabins, no strange activity. I started doubting myself, wondering if I'd misread the whole thing. But at exactly 3:15 a.m. on our last night before the Azores, the ship's fire alarm started blaring. It came from the kitchen. A grease fur, supposedly, but I'd been watching the feed. There was no fire. Someone had pulled the alarm on purpose. Morrison and I hid inside a maintenance closet near the storage hold as chaos broke out above deck. Through the vent, we heard soft footsteps, multiple pairs, moving fast but quiet. Then came the electronic beep of a keycard, one that shouldn't exist, opening the hold door like they belonged there. We waited until all 5 of them were inside. Then Morrison hit the emergency lockdown he'd wired earlier. The heavy magnetic locks clamped shut with a loud metallic thud, trapping them inside the room with their fake loot. When security finally opened the door 20 minutes later, the thieves were standing among scattered costume jewelry and spray-painted rocks, their bags half filled with fake gold. The scarred man actually laughed when he realized what had happened, shaking his head like he admired the setup. When we docked in the Azores 6 hours later, the Portuguese police were already waiting. The FBI met us in Southampton with warrants for the entire group. Turned out they were part of a Romanian crime ring that had robbed 3 other cruise ships in 2 years, always the same way. Fake identities, a staged distraction, then a quick heist before vanishing at port. The FBI told me they'd stolen over $12 million total. The ceramic knives they used were custom-made in Prague, designed to slip through scanners. The worst part, they had inside help. A crew member from reservations had been feeding them information about wealthy passengers in exchange for a cut. They caught him trying to board a flight to Bucharest the day after we docked. Morrison offered me a job as the cruise line's new head of security, but I turned it down. The sea might look peaceful, but I'd had enough of floating metal prisons filled with strangers. Anton later testified in court and used his reward money to open a bar in Boston. He named it the Ceramic Knife, which I told him was a terrible idea, but he didn't care. Sometimes I stop by and we talk about that night, how close those men came to pulling off the perfect heist. My arm healed fine, just a thin white scar that aches when it rains. And every time I see a cruise ad now, I can't help wondering how many people realize they're locking themselves in a city at sea surrounded by strangers, praying they're exactly who they claim to be. The afternoon sun was beating down on the pool deck when everything changed. I was 38 then, managing a hardware store in Phoenix. We'd saved 2 years for that cruise. Me, my wife Lisa, our teenage daughter Madison, and my dad Walter. He'd just turned 65 and retired after 40 years at the post office. He never took vacations, always said he'd travel after retirement. So for his birthday, we surprised him with this trip. It was supposed to be perfect. We were between Florida and Jamaica, second day at sea, and for once, Dad was having fun. He laughed at Madison's terrible shuffleboard skills, his face sunburned despite the SPF 50 Lisa kept reapplying. I remember the exact moment it happened. Madison had just scored her first point and was doing a goofy victory dance when Dad's shuffleboard stick clattered onto the deck. His right hand gripped his chest, fingers digging into his bright Hawaiian shirt, the ridiculous one with parrots all over it. His face went from red to an awful gray in seconds. He tried to say something, but only a strangled gasp came out before his knees buckled. I caught him before he hit the floor, but his weight nearly took me down. His eyes were wide, terrified, and he kept clutching his chest like trying to pull something out. Lisa screamed for help while Madison froze, still holding her shuffleboard stick, not understanding what she was seeing. A crew member in a white uniform appeared within seconds, though it felt like forever, and called for medical help on his radio. They brought a wheelchair, but Dad couldn't sit up. He kept slumping forward, wheezing horribly. We ended up carrying him, me holding him under the arms, the crew member grabbing his legs, while Lisa ran ahead, clearing a path through the staring crowd of sunbathers. The medical center was down on deck 2, hidden behind the photo gallery where they sell overpriced pictures of you boarding the ship. And when we reached it, the smell hit first, something sharp and metallic, like disinfectant and fear. It didn't smell like a hospital. Not that clean, sharp scent of disinfectant, but this strange mix of mildew and cheap air freshener, like someone had tried to hide something rotten underneath. The waiting area was pitiful. 3 plastic chairs, an empty water cooler with dust on the bottle, and buzzing fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly. The man who called himself Dr. Petrov introduced himself in a thick Eastern European accent. He couldn't have been older than 30, with acne scars and scrubs so thin they looked ready to tear. His nurse, Carla, a woman from the Philippines, seemed to be the only one who actually knew what she was doing. She helped Dad onto what they called an examination table, a padded bench bolted to the wall, and began checking his vitals. Dr. Petrov listened to Dad's chest with a stethoscope that looked older than me, then frowned slightly. "Is probable cardiac event," he said flatly, as if announcing a common cold. "We give aspirin, monitor, next port in 10, maybe 12 hours. He is stable enough." But Dad didn't look stable. His lips were turning blue, and he kept clutching his chest, tears running down his face. Lisa lost it. I'd never seen her like that. She grabbed Petrov's scrubs, shouting about helicopters, the Coast Guard, anything that could save him. Petrov froze, blinking like a deer in headlights, while Carla gently pried Lisa's hands away. "Ma'am, please," Carla said softly. "Evacuation helicopter cost minimum flight time." $50,000. Insurance no cover. Need corporate approval first. Takes 4, maybe 5 hours. She opened the supply cabinet as if to reassure us, but it only made things worse. A few bandages, some basic meds, bottles with faded labels, and an oxygen tank that looked like it belonged in a museum. The defibrillator in the corner had a note taped to it. Out of order, awaiting parts. Dad started vomiting, violent, painful spasms that made him cry out. Petrov looked completely lost. He fumbled with the oxygen tank, the strap broke, and we ended up holding the mask in place ourselves because there wasn't enough tape to keep it on. When I asked about nitroglycerin or clot-busting drugs, Petrov just shook his head. Too expensive, expire too fast, corporate policy. 3 hours passed like years. Carla kept checking his pulse manually because the heart monitor's battery was dead. Petrov disappeared for an hour and came back smelling like cigarettes. By hour 4, Dad was having seizures, Carla called them episodes, and even Petrov started to look terrified. He finally admitted he'd only been a general practitioner for 2 years in Romania, treating colds and stomach bugs, before the cruise line hired him for a third of what an American doctor cost. Then came the cruise director, Gregory, a spray-tanned man with 2 white teeth and too much gold on his uniform. He watched Dad seize, waited for it to stop, and then calmly recited a speech about liability. "Your father signed a waiver," he said, showing me fine print on his phone. "Section 47B states medical facilities are limited and guests travel at their own risk." Lisa broke down crying, and Gregory offered us a 20% discount on our next cruise, plus free drink packages for the rest of this one. I wanted to hit him. Dad's skin was gray now, his breathing shallow and wet. Word spread fast. Passengers gather. D outside, filming through the window. Some even complained about the noise interrupting the comedy show next door. I snapped. I told everyone the truth. The broken equipment, the unqualified doctor, the refusal to call for help. People started posting online. Within an hour, videos were circulating, and Gregory came back with the captain, a stern Norwegian man named Eriksson. They offered evacuation, but only if we signed a waiver releasing the cruise line from blame and paid the $50,000 deposit up front. They even brought a card reader. Madison, our daughter, used the ship's Wi-Fi, $15 for 30 minutes, to email news stations with photos and videos. CNN called back within 20 minutes. Suddenly, the captain's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Corporate panic. They approved the helicopter, but by then, it had been 7.5 hours. Dad was barely conscious, his pulse faint and erratic. The elevator to the top deck was broken, so 6 crew members carried him up 4 flights of stairs on a stretcher held together with duct tape. One of the handles broke halfway. When the helicopter arrived, it couldn't land. The ship's pad hadn't been certified in 3 years. They had to lower a rescue basket. Watching them lift Dad, limp, pale, swaying in the wind 30 feet above the deck, was the worst moment of my life. He barely survived. The hospital in Fort Lauderdale said 1 more hour and he would have died. 9 hours without proper care left him with permanent heart damage. 3 weeks in the ICU, triple bypass surgery, and a $400,000 bill the cruise line refused to cover. They blamed us for the delay, claiming we interfered by contacting the media. We're still in court, but Dad's alive. The cruise line never admitted fault, just released a statement about reviewing their medical preparedness protocols. Dr. Petrov still works for them. Madison found his social media, photos of him smiling on another ship as if nothing happened. And in the company's press release, they mentioned fixing the defibrillator, proud of their commitment to passenger safety. I'd been saving money for 2 years working long shifts at a greasy diner in Denver, telling myself it would all be worth it once I stepped onto that ship. My roommate Ashley thought I'd lost it, said I should wait so we could go together someday. But I needed this. I needed to prove I could finally do something for myself. The first 2 days were perfect. I went snorkeling, made friends by the pool, and ate way too much shrimp at the buffet. On the 3rd night, I decided to treat myself to the ship's fancy steakhouse, the kind you had to pay extra for and make reservations in advance. The place was beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows showing the endless ocean and candles flickering on every table. My waiter, Dominic, had this thick Italian accent and told me the ribeye with herb butter was the best thing on the menu. When it came out, I couldn't resist taking pictures. The steak was massive, charred at the edges and pink inside, melting with green butter full of garlic and rosemary. The first bite tasted a little strange, metallic almost, but Dominic said that was normal for dry-aged meat. The couple next to me, the Brennans from Wisconsin, were celebrating their 40th anniversary. Mr. Brennan joked that he'd leave his wife for the chef. We laughed, shared stories, and I ate every bite, mopping up the butter with bread until the plate was clean. That night, around midnight, I woke to my stomach twisting like something alive inside me. The room was dark except for a slice of moonlight from the balcony door. The ship rocked harder than usual, making everything spin. I tried to tell myself it was just indigestion, but the pain suddenly sharpened, deep under my ribs, like someone wringing out my insides. I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up everything I'd eaten. The steak, potatoes, mojitos, all of it burning as it came back up. It didn't stop. Wave after wave of vomiting left me shaking, drenched in cold sweat. Between episodes, I noticed something terrifying. Dark, grainy chunks like coffee grounds and streaks of red. That wasn't food. That was blood. I panicked and called guest services, but the phone just rang and rang. No one answered. My roommate, Bethany, a girl I'd been matched with through the solo traveler program, wasn't even there, probably still at the nightclub. I grabbed my room key, slid into my flip-flops, and stumbled into the hallway, clutching my stomach. The ship's corridors were empty and endless, lined with those dizzying patterned carpets that made my nausea worse. I remembered the infirmary was on deck 2, so I had to take the elevator down. While waiting, I heard retching behind one of the cabin doors, then another farther away. The sounds echoed down the hall, people throwing up everywhere. When the elevator arrived, 3 people were already inside, all looking like death. A man in a Disney cruise shirt was bent over the handrail, skin gray-green. A woman sat in the corner holding an ice bucket full of vomit, mascara smeared down her face. A teenage boy's legs trembled so badly they knocked together. None of us spoke, just the sound of labored breathing and the smell. Sweat, bile, fear. The elevator stopped at nearly every floor, picking up more sick passengers. By deck 4, there were a dozen of us crammed in. One old lady clutched a rosary and whispered, "This isn't right. This isn't right." When the doors opened on deck 2, my stomach dropped. The hallway outside the infirmary was filled, absolutely packed, with people. At least 60 or 70 passengers lined the corridor, many sitting on the floor or slumped against walls. I saw Mrs. Brennan there, vomiting into a plastic bag while her husband rubbed her back, pale as a ghost. Parents held limp kids in their arms. A pregnant woman sobbed while her partner tried fanning her. Near the front, a man had collapsed, his wife screaming for help that never came. The smell was unbearable. Vomit, sickness, and beneath it, that same metallic tang that reminded me of my dinner. I joined the line, sliding down the wall to sit beside a woman still wearing a glittering evening dress. She said she'd already been waiting 2 hours. 2 hours. The doctor inside was just handing out the same anti-nausea pills to everyone and sending them away. No IVs, no checks, nothing real. Her husband had gone searching for water because room service stopped answering. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. When she tried to stand, she fell right back down, her body too weak to hold her up. Another hour crawled by, the line barely moving. Then a crew member in a white uniform forced his way through the crowd, ignoring everyone begging for help. He spoke quickly into a radio, mostly in another language, maybe Filipino, but I caught a few English words. Containment, corporate, media blackout. The infirmary doors opened briefly, and I saw the chaos inside. Stretchers everywhere, nurses rushing, a doctor yelling at a man in a suit who was definitely not medical. The man waved papers around, shouting, while the doctor pointed at the sick passengers. Then the door slammed shut again, leaving us in silence. I felt my vision flicker at the edges. My tongue was dry like sandpaper. The woman beside me wasn't responding anymore, just staring blankly at the ceiling. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out, and I hit the wall, too weak to move. That's when a young crew member, maybe 19, knelt beside me. He looked terrified. He handed me a half-empty bottle of water, whispering that I needed to go back to my cabin immediately. He said the restaurant where I'd eaten, the steakhouse, had a broken freezer 2 days ago, but management said them to serve the meat anyway. Over 300 passengers had eaten there. He said corporate was sending their own doctors in the morning, but tonight the order was to keep everything quiet, to avoid reports, records, lawsuits. Then his supervisor appeared, yelling at him in Tagalog, and he hurried away. But his words echoed in my head. Broken freezer, 100 sick, cover up. I sipped the last of that water, trying to keep it down, and started noticing the small things around me. Crew members weren't drinking from the ship's water at all. Every one of them had sealed bottles with foreign labels. They knew something. They all did. The security guards at the end of the hallway were wearing medical masks, something I'd never seen on a cruise before. But the most shocking thing was when I saw 2 passengers from first class, the same ones who sat at the captain's table that first night, being quietly taken through a side door straight into the infirmary, skipping the entire line of sick passengers. The woman next to me noticed it too. She started to cry, not from pain but from anger, realizing that even in a disaster like this, money decided who got saved first. She tried to shout, tried to tell everyone what was happening, but her voice broke, too weak from hours of vomiting. Around 5 in the morning, after nearly 5 hours in that hallway, something changed. The man in the suit came out of the infirmary with 2 guards and began checking key cards, calling out room numbers. When they got to me, he glanced at his tablet, frowned, and ordered the guards to take me back to my cabin. I tried to protest, told him I needed help, that I could barely stand, but he just gave this cold, fake smile and said the doctor had cleared me to recover in my room. The guards grabbed me by the arms and half-carried, half-dragged me toward the elevator. As they moved me away, I heard him giving the same orders to others, clearing the hallway like we were an inconvenience. The pregnant woman was crying, begging for help, but they ignored her. The man who'd passed out hours earlier was being lifted onto a luggage cart while his wife stumbled behind, pleading for someone to help. No one was listening anymore. The guards dumped me in my room and told me to stay there until further notice, that room service would bring electrolyte drinks and crackers soon. Of course, nothing came. My roommate Bethany was lying in bed, curled into a ball, soaked in sweat. She'd been sick too, tried to get to the infirmary around 3 in the morning, but collapsed in the elevator. Another passenger had dragged her back and left her there. We spent the next 18 hours taking turns in the bathroom, sharing the last of our bottled water, and listening to the chaos outside as more and more people got sick. Later, when we finally docked in Mexico, I learned that 43 passengers had to be hospitalized. 7 ended up in intensive care. 2 elderly people died during that night at sea. The cruise line's solution was to offer a 25% discount on a future trip, as long as we signed papers promising not to talk to the media, not to post online, not to sue. Most people signed just to escape that floating disease trap. I didn't. That's why I can tell you what really happened, why I'm naming them. Royal Atlantic Ventures, ship Paradise Queen, sailing from Galveston on March 15th, 2022. I spent 22 years fighting fires in Chicago, but nothing in all that time prepared me for what happened last April aboard the Celestial Dream. My daughter Megan had begged me to take that Mediterranean cruise about 6 months after I retired, said I needed a break, that I'd earned the chance to relax and see the world beyond sirens and smoke. She even found the trip online, 10 days through the Mediterranean, and wouldn't take no for an answer. Drove me to the airport herself to make sure I went. The ship was enormous, one of those floating cities with 8 restaurants, 3 pools, and more entertainment than you could fit in a mall. We'd been sailing for 4 days, leaving Barcelona that morning on our way to Nice. I was actually starting to enjoy it. I'd made friends with a group of retirees from Michigan who'd adopted me into their morning coffee and shuffleboard club. The weather had been perfect. Bright sun, calm seas, and skies so blue they looked painted. That afternoon started like any other. I'd just finished lunch at the buffet on Deck 7, grilled salmon and fancy little potatoes they served every day, and was heading to my cabin for a nap before the evening's show. The first sign something was off came around 3:30 when I noticed the horizon outside my porthole had turned a strange dark purple, like a spreading bruise. Then came the captain's calm voice over the speaker, saying we might hit some rough seas and to secure loose items. I thought it was routine, but the way the crew was moving told me otherwise. Quick, focused, no smiles, just that tight professional urgency I recognized from my firefighting days. That kind of quiet fear you hide when you already know what's coming. Within 20 minutes, the ship began to sway in this slow, uneasy rhythm that made my coffee mug slide across the desk. I went to the balcony and froze. The waves looked like moving skyscrapers, white spray bursting high above the deck, and that purple sky had gone almost black. It didn't look like a storm, it looked biblical. Most passengers were still walking around, taking pictures, unaware of the danger rising all around them. I started gathering essentials, passport, wallet, medication, putting them in a waterproof pouch. Old habits. I tried calling Megan, but the connection was breaking up. Managed to text her that we'd hit rough weather, but I was fine. Didn't want to scare her. By 4 o'clock, all outdoor decks were closed. The captain came on again, voice tighter this time, telling everyone to return to 2 air cabins and wait. I couldn't. Not with what I saw outside. The waves swallowed the horizon whole. So I went to deck 5, near the dining hall. Big space, lots of exits. If something went wrong, I wasn't going to die trapped below deck. The dining room was half empty, maybe 30 people still trying to eat while plates slid across tables despite the crew's efforts to steady them. Then it hit. The first real wave. The entire ship lurched sideways, hard. A grand piano snapped free and slammed into the wall with a sound that felt like thunder inside my chest. Chaos broke out instantly. Tables overturned, glass shattered, food and bodies and chairs flying in every direction. An elderly woman was thrown 15 feet, her husband crawling after her as the ship tilted at a terrifying angle. Then the alarms went off, screaming sirens over human screams, the sound of breaking glass, shattering lights, metal twisting somewhere deep below. I grabbed a support column, pulled a young couple toward me just as another wave hit, and heard the deep groan of the ship's metal frame bending. The lights flickered, then switched to backup power, bathing everything in a dim yellow glow. Through the windows there was no sky anymore, just walls of water, black and endless. A crew member stumbled in, blood on his face, shouting for everyone to grab life jackets and head to the muster station. But the floor was already flooding. Freezing seawater poured in through broken windows, tables floated, and people slipped, screaming. Someone yelled that water was rising from below decks, too. Each time the ship tilted, you could hear something huge give way inside, the kind of deep, groaning sound metal makes right before it breaks. I reached the life jacket rack and started throwing them to anyone nearby, helping a family of 4 who huddled together behind a fallen table. The father's arm was bent, wrong, the mother holding a napkin against her daughter's bleeding leg. I was tightening their straps when the captain's voice came over the intercom again, only this time he was shouting, "This is not a drill." Those 5 words hit harder than any wave. His voice cracked with fear, and that's when I knew things were far worse than we'd been told. We tried moving as a group toward the muster station, but another wave smashed into the hull, and the lights went out completely. For 10 seconds, we were trapped in darkness with nothing but screams and rushing water. When emergency lights flickered back on, the dining hall was waist-deep in freezing seawater. Through shattered glass, I saw waves that had to be 50 feet high, mountains of black water lifting us up and dropping us like a toy. A man near me was hyperventilating, trying to go back to his wife's cabin on deck 3. I had to stop him because we could all hear it now. The flood spreading below us, doors slamming from the pressure, the ship creaking and moaning as it fought to stay alive. The way to the muster station was pure nightmare. The ship tilted so far we were crawling along walls, then sliding back when it righted. Water kept rising. I saw a woman swept away from her husband's grip toward the window, and 3 of us formed a chain to drag her back, her face pale, coughing up seawater. The crew, those young kids who'd practiced calm drills, looked broken by terror. One girl, maybe early 20s, was crying so hard her mascara ran down her face as she tried to count passengers with a clipboard that had already turned to mush. She just kept whispering the safety procedures like a prayer. By the time we reached deck 4, the lifeboat area looked like pure chaos. The ship was pitching so violently that boats swung out over the waves, then slammed back into the hull. I watched one get crushed like a tin can, torn apart before it even touched the water. That's when it hit me. We might not have enough working lifeboats left. People were screaming, shoving, separating from loved ones, and somewhere in the madness I saw a man shove an elderly woman to the ground just to get ahead. The thin mask of order disappeared faster than our hope of survival. The wind screamed so loudly you had to shout just to be heard. Rain hit from every direction, sharp as bullets. Every few seconds, another massive wave swept across the deck, knocking down anyone who wasn't clinging to something solid, dragging people toward the railings or worse, over them. Then came the sound that froze even the crew in place. A horrifying metallic shriek echoed from somewhere deep below, followed by a violent jolt that shook the entire ship like it had been punched by some giant hand. The floor suddenly tilted beyond 45 degrees and stayed there. Passengers slid down the slick deck, a mass of tangled bodies and life jackets, some vanishing straight over the edge into the roaring Black Sea. I locked my arms around a steel pole, feet dangling in midair, staring in disbelief as the horizon outside seemed to rotate. The whole ship was rolling, slowly, terrifyingly, as if we were about to flip upside down. Water was pouring in from everywhere now, not just from the waves outside, but from inside the ship itself. Fountains burst through drain grates, stairs turned into waterfalls, and deep below, the engines screamed like dying creatures trapped in steel. For half a minute that felt endless. We hung there on the edge of capsizing. 2,000 people holding their breath, whispering prayers in a dozen languages, while thunder and wind swallowed their voices. Then, impossibly, the ship began to right itself, groaning and trembling like a wounded animal fighting to live. The decks slowly leveled again, though it still felt like we were standing on the back of something alive and angry. A crew member, soaked and shaking, yelled into his radio that the Greek Coast Guard was 8 miles out. Helicopters were in the air, rescue ships pushing toward us through the storm, but in a sea like that, 8 miles might as well have been 800. We spent the next 3 hours trapped in pure survival. We helped the injured, formed human chains to keep people from getting swept away, used buckets and trays to bail out water while the ship sank lower, inch by inch. But somehow, impossibly, it kept floating. When the first helicopter appeared through the storm, its searchlight cutting a white path through the rain, people started sobbing, collapsing with relief. The sight of that light felt holy, but we knew it would take countless trips to get everyone off. The ship was still taking on water faster than the pumps could manage. They lifted the elderly and injured first, hauling them up in baskets that swung wildly in the wind. I stayed behind to help load others, holding terrified passengers steady as water lapped around our legs on what had once been the upper deck. It took 14 hours to get everyone off the Celestial Dream. I was in one of the last groups to leave. From the safety of the rescue vessel, I watched our cruise ship, glowing in the floodlights, finally surrender to the sea just after sunrise. No one died that night, something the news kept calling a miracle. But 43 passengers were hospitalized and hundreds more hurt in ways the reports never mentioned. They flew us to Athens, set us up in hotel rooms, and soon the cruise line's representatives came around with their polished apologies and waiver forms. They offered compensation and free future cruises that no one in that room would ever accept. 2 days later, I was back in Chicago. Megan met me at O'Hare, tears streaming down her face as she hugged me like she'd never let go. She'd seen the footage, those horrifying videos of a ship nearly on its side, passengers clinging to railings, while waves swallowed the deck. She kept apologizing for talking me into going, which hurt more than anything, because none of it was her fault. The official report called it a rare meteorological event, a sudden pressure drop that created hurricane-force winds in minutes, something that happens maybe once in 10 years in the Mediterranean. But knowing the science doesn't quiet the memories. I still wake up hearing that metallic scream, feeling the deck tilt under me, seeing faces sliding toward the railings. I can't watch cruise ads anymore. When friends mention their vacation plans, I just smile, change the subject. Because how could I ever explain that 22 years running into burning buildings didn't scare me half as much as that single afternoon when the ocean decided to remind 2,000 tourists how small we really are? 5 months ago, I was just another burned-out ICU nurse, desperate to escape the endless beeping of machines and 12-hour shifts that blurred into each other. After watching 3 patients die in 1 week at the hospital in Houston, I finally decided I needed out, even just for a while. I emptied my savings account, 2 years' worth, and booked myself a 7-day cruise through the Eastern Caribbean. The Ocean Jewel was everything the commercials promised. 16 decks of pure escape, shining pools, endless food, music, and laughter. A floating paradise. I remember standing on the dock at Port Canaveral, staring up at that enormous ship and thinking that for once, I was going to rest. I was going to forget everything and breathe again. The first 2 days were perfect. Sunrise yoga on the upper deck, margaritas by the pool, dinners where I didn't have to rush or eat standing in a hallway between emergencies. For the first time in years, I felt alive again. But everything changed on the 3rd night, somewhere between the Bahamas and our next stop. I'd gone to bed early, pleasantly drunk from too much wine at the captain's dinner, one of those fancy events where everyone claps for the officers and pretends they're not exhausted and sunburned. The night was calm, warm, and quiet. But somewhere out there, beneath all that peace, something had already begun to change. My cabin was on deck 7, nothing fancy, but it was cozy, with a small balcony where I could sit and watch the black water roll endlessly under the moonlight. Around 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because nurses never lose that habit of checking clocks when woken up. I heard someone sprinting full speed down the corridor outside my door. Then came the screams, not just one voice, but several, the kind of sounds that stop your heart cold. In the ICU, I'd learned to tell when a scream was real, when it came from true fear, and these were real. My body reacted before my mind caught up. I was out of bed, pulling on my jeans, heart pounding. The hallway outside was chaos. 3 cabins down, a couple stood in their doorway. She clutched a torn nightgown to her chest, and her husband had blood running down his face from a gash above his eyebrow. Their door hung broken on one hinge, the lock shattered like someone had pried it open with a metal bar. Further along, 2 more doors were open wide, and a sharp chemical smell filled the air. It stung my nose, familiar in a terrible way, chloroform or something close to it. A young woman sat slumped against the wall, wrists red and cut where zip ties had been. She just kept whispering the same words over and over. They had master keys. They had master keys. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows that made everything look like a horror movie. Then 2 security officers finally arrived. It felt like forever, though it was probably only a few minutes. Instead of calling for backup or help, the injured, they started forcing everyone back into their cabins, telling us it was for our own safety. One of them, a tall man with a Baltic accent and a tag that said Dimitri, kept repeating that it was just a minor disturbance, but I could see right into the Hamiltons' cabin, an older couple I'd met at the pool the day before. Their room had been completely trashed, clothes everywhere, safe broken open, Mrs. Hamilton sitting on the bed, hands still bound behind her with white plastic ties. When Dimitri noticed me looking, he stepped in front of the doorway, blocking my view and ordering me to return to my cabin. Against every instinct telling me to help, I backed away, but near the end of the corridor, I noticed something strange. A gray maintenance cart parked beside the emergency exit. It looked like a regular cleaning cart, except on top of it were pieces of electronic equipment. I recognized some of it, signal jammers, the kind used to block communications. Half covered by a tarp was something else. A professional lock-picking gun, the expensive kind that could open any hotel-style lock in seconds. When Dimitri caught me staring, his expression changed. He grabbed my arm, not enough to bruise, but firm enough to warn me, and personally walked me back to my door. His partner, a short woman speaking rapid Portuguese into her radio, said the words, "damage control," before switching back to her native language. I locked my door, shoved a chair under the handle, and sat frozen, listening as the noise outside faded. My phone had no signal, not surprising in the middle of the ocean, but the ship's Wi-Fi was suddenly under maintenance. Around 4 a.m., a calm voice came over the intercom claiming to be the hotel director. He said there had been an incident with a disturbed passenger who was now in custody and that everything was fine. But I could still hear people when the hall talking about missing valuables, broken locks, and multiple attackers. None of what I'd seen matched that neat explanation, and when I pressed my ear to the door, I heard Dimitri again on his radio, saying something chilling. "Keep the service elevator cameras off until we're done cleaning up." By morning, it was like nothing had ever happened. The dining hall gleamed, waiters smiled, music played softly over the speakers, but at least a third of the tables were empty, and the ones who were there shared quiet, uneasy glances. I spotted the Hamiltons sitting alone in a corner booth. Mrs. Hamilton wore long sleeves even though it was warm, probably hiding the marks on her wrists. When I sat with them, she leaned close and whispered that they'd lost everything: cash, passports, jewelry, even her grandmother's ring. Security had made them sign papers promising not to talk about the incident in exchange for compensation. That's when a man at the next table turned around and introduced himself as Paul, a cybersecurity consultant. He showed me a photo on his phone, an old Facebook post written in Tagalog by a crew member joking about easy targets and big score coming. The man worked in guest services, meaning he had access to the passenger list. Paul also told me 3 crew members had suddenly fallen ill that morning, including one from security. He overheard officers saying they needed to contain this before docking. Soon, a quiet network of passengers started forming, 15 of us, all from Deck 7, comparing what we'd seen. Janet from cabin 7039 said she'd caught her cabin steward standing in her doorway with 2 men around 2:30 a.m., one of them holding a master keycard labeled Security Override. Another passenger, Frank, a retired cop, discovered that all cameras on our deck had been under maintenance exactly during the time of the attacks. The more we talked, the clearer it became. This wasn't random theft. It was a coordinated setup. When we reached St. Thomas that afternoon, Paul and I saw 3 crew members being quietly escorted off the ship through a side gangway. They wore civilian clothes and carried duffel bags, but I recognized one, the same woman who'd spoken Portuguese over the radio. When some of us tried to disembark to report everything, we were told passengers from Deck 7 were restricted from leaving for our safety. Janet somehow slipped past them and reached the police, but came back furious. The cruise company had already called it a minor theft, and the local authorities said they had no jurisdiction. That evening, Frank invited us to his suite. 20 of us gathered there, passing around photos, notes, screenshots, anything we had. Dorothy, a paralegal from Indiana, helped us write formal statements. Frank used his military satellite phone to upload everything, sending it to the FBI, Coast Guard, and a few news outlets. Then came the knock on the door. The hotel director, flanked by 4 security guards, including Dimitri, claimed we were violating safety rules. They demanded we hand over our devices for investigation, but Frank stood his ground. They left, clearly shaken by his confidence. The final 3 days of that trip felt like a standoff. The crew couldn't silence us without creating more attention, and we couldn't force them to act. But when we finally docked back in Port Canaveral, 2 FBI agents and a Coast Guard officer were waiting at the gangway. Thanks to Frank's evidence, 17 passengers filed official complaints. The story hit the news within hours. The cruise line tried to call it an isolated act, but when investigators found over $200,000 in stolen goods hidden in a crew storage room and proof that their own security system had been hacked, they couldn't hide anymore. 3 months later, I got a call from a federal prosecutor. 11 crew members had been arrested, including 2 senior security officers. They'd been running the same scam for years on different ships, robbing passengers in the dead of night and covering it up with corporate silence. The company quietly settled with all of us, paying far more than what was stolen just to bury the story. But that doesn't erase what happened, because the sea doesn't keep secrets forever. I was fresh out of high school when my best friends and I decided to book a cruise as a graduation trip. There were 5 of us, Ethan, Claire, Jordan, Emily, and me. And we thought a week at sea would be the perfect goodbye to childhood. My life back then was simple. Part-time job at a grocery store, college plans I wasn't sure about, and that craving for something bigger. The cruise was supposed to be pure freedom before real life began. The ship itself was massive. Casinos, pools stacked on decks, music everywhere. The first 2 days were all laughter and no sleep. But one night, Claire and I wandered too far near the lower decks. A service door had been left open, and the air inside was cold and humming with machinery. We should have turned back, but we didn't. That's when we overheard 2 crew members whispering near the corner. Their accents were different, but one phrase came through clear as day. "The morgue compartments are already too full." For a second, I thought I'd heard it wrong. A morgue on a cruise ship wasn't something I'd ever thought about. Claire grabbed my arm, her eyes wide, and whispered, "Did you hear that?" We froze, holding our breath. One of the men sighed and said, "We'll have to label the rest as medical incidents. No space left." Then their footsteps faded down the hallway. Claire wanted to run back upstairs, but I told her we had to stay calm and act normal. We told the others what we'd heard, and Ethan laughed it off, saying every ship had a morgue for emergencies. Jordan didn't laugh, though. He frowned and muddied. "Too full? That doesn't make sense." Things took a darker turn 2 nights later. Emily got into an argument with a bartender, accusing him of shortchanging her. She wasn't drunk, just stubborn when she felt cheated. A supervisor stepped in, tall, with slicked back hair and an expression that never changed, no matter what Emily said. The argument cooled off eventually, but Emily muttered that she'd report him to guest services. That was the last time we saw her. The next morning, her bed was empty, her phone still plugged in, and nothing in her cabin looked touched. We went straight to the staff, but their reaction felt rehearsed. The same supervisor claimed she'd been seen leaving a lounge with some new friends around midnight, though none of us had seen her go anywhere. Security promised to make an announcement and check cameras, but no update ever came. When we pushed again, they insisted she must have left the ship during a port stop, even though her things were all still there. It felt like they were trying to shut us up. That night, Ethan joked that we should sneak into the lower decks to find out the truth, but the longer we stared at Emily's untouched shoes by the door, the less like a joke it seemed. Jordan managed to get a cleaning lady to show him where the crew elevators were. Claire and I took one down, timing it between staff runs. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The carpet turned into metal flooring, and when the doors slid open, a strange smell hit us, a mix of cleaning fluid and something metallic and sour. We barely took a few steps before a man in uniform appeared. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw us. He asked what we were doing there, voice calm but sharp. Claire blurted that we were lost, and he silently escorted us back up. He didn't yell or threaten, just stared ahead, blank and cold, like we didn't exist. Back in our cabin, Ethan and D. Jordan were waiting, pale and tense. They said they'd overheard two crewmen near the loading bay talking about moving another one before morning. The next day, rumors spread among passengers. A girl had fallen overboard, or maybe it was a medical evacuation. None of it matched what we knew. When we asked about Emily again, security repeated the same line about her choosing to leave. Jordan lost his temper and shouted, but they threatened to lock him up for causing a disturbance. That's when we realized it. Emily wasn't coming back, and the truth was being buried below deck. Ethan said we needed proof, no matter what it cost. That night, we waited until everything went quiet and crept back to the crew elevators. Jordan had stolen a room key from a cart, and somehow, it worked on the lower levels. We moved through the narrow corridors, phones ready, flashlights off. The air was thick and cold. From one locked door came a low hum, like machinery, mixed with a steady chill that felt wrong. At the end of the hallway, a metal door was cracked open. Ethan pushed it slightly, and we peeked inside. Stainless steel drawers lined the walls. In the dim light, we saw toe tags, dozens of them. Claire gasped before she could stop herself, and the door slammed shut so hard it made the walls shake. A shadow moved behind the steel reflection. Someone was in there. We ran. The elevator ride up felt endless, hearts pounding, praying the stolen key would work, and it did. The next morning, security came knocking. They said we'd been reported for entering restricted areas. We acted dumb, saying we'd been in the casino, but the officer's stare said he didn't believe a word. From then on, we stayed together, whispering only when we had to, certain we were being watched. Emily's name never appeared in any bulletin. It was like she had never existed. When the ship finally docked, we packed fast and left without looking back. No one ever called. No one ever investigated. Her disappearance was written off as a runaway case, but I still heard. Are those crewmen whispering about compartments too full? I still see Emily's glowing phone screen, her half-written message unsent. We told her parents everything, but without proof, it sounded like paranoia. Maybe that's what the ship depends on, that we go home too scared, too small, and too alone to fight back. I booked that cruise because it was cheap, just a way to see the world during my college break. The ship wasn't fancy, paint chipped on the rails, narrow halls that barely fit two people, and my cabin was tiny, with a single bed pressed to the wall and a desk that creaked every time I opened the drawer. Through the small porthole, all I could see was endless gray water. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for someone traveling alone. On the second night, I came back to my cabin after dinner and noticed a small folded paper just inside the door. I thought it was a note from housekeeping, but when I unfolded it, the words were written in shaky block letters. Don't trust the crew. That was all it said. No name, no reason, nothing else. I remember staring at it for a long time, wondering if it was a prank or even meant for me. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, like someone had written it while looking over their shoulder. I didn't tell anyone. I folded the note, slipped it into my backpack, and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. Every time a crew member smiled or asked how my day was going, I couldn't help but wonder if they knew something I didn't. I tried to act normal, but I found myself studying their faces, watching their movements, noticing strange little things I would have ignored before, like the man behind the bar who polished glasses but never looked up, or the steward who lingered by certain cabins for too long, pretending to check his cart. It started to feel like I'd stumbled into something hidden, something I wasn't supposed to see. The next morning, there was another note under my door. This one said, "They'll deny everything. Stay quiet." My hands shook when I read it. I finally decided to take both notes to the purser's desk, thinking someone would take it seriously. But the woman behind the counter smiled politely, laughed a little, and said, Passengers sometimes imagine things at sea. She pushed the notes back toward me like she didn't want to touch them. I walked away, face burning, feeling like a fool, but deep down, the warning echoed louder. I kept telling myself it had to be a joke, but soon, things started to feel different. At breakfast, a guy I'd been talking to the day before, a student traveling alone, wasn't there. I figured he'd slept in, but by lunch, his seat was still empty. By dinner, no one mentioned him, no announcement, nothing. It was as if he'd never been there. The next day, it happened again. A woman who always sat by the pool reading under her wide-brimmed hat suddenly vanished too. Her chair stayed empty, her towel left behind. I kept walking the decks, searching for her face in the crowd, but she was gone. After that, I started keeping track of the solo travelers. A few just stopped showing up. Then one night, I came back to my cabin and saw a third note under my door. My heart dropped before I even picked it up. "You're not next yet. Stay alert." That single word, "yet," echoed in my mind like a siren. I barely slept. Every creak outside my cabin made me hold my breath. I watched the strip of light under the door, waiting for a shadow to pause there too long. The constant hum of the engines no longer felt safe. It sounded like something warning me to stay awake. I tried reporting it again, this time to a different officer, but he just smiled and said it was probably seasickness. "People get jumpy out here," he told me, waving me off. I walked away, clutching the note, my fingers damp with sweat, realizing there was no one left I could trust. The ship suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if every hallway led nowhere safe. By the fifth day, I stopped pretending everything was fine. The dining hall felt emptier, though no one seemed to notice. Families kept laughing, couples posed for photos, and the crew moved around smiling like nothing was wrong. But I could feel the absence. Silent, heavy, undeniable. My meals became mechanical. I chewed without tasting, too busy counting who was still there. Late that night, I saw two crew members guiding a young man toward a back stairwell. He wasn't drunk, but he looked uneasy, his steps dragging. He glanced back once, and the look on his face made my stomach twist. It was like he wanted to call for help, but knew it wouldn't matter. Then they turned the corner, and he was gone. That's when I knew. The notes weren't warnings, they were the truth. I spent the rest of that night barricaded in my room. I dragged the desk and chair against the door, sat with my knees pulled to my chest, and listened. Every tiny sound made my pulse jump. No new note came, but that silence was worse. It felt like waiting for something that might never come, but could at any second. The air felt heavy, thick with fear. I didn't sleep until dawn light crept through the porthole, turning the water outside a dull blue. 2 days later, the ship finally docked. I didn't wait for the announcement. I walked off with my backpack and didn't stop until my feet hit solid ground. No one ever mentioned the missing passengers. There were no reports, no names, no stories, like they'd been erased. I still keep the 3 notes inside a notebook at home. The paper is crumpled, the ink smudged where my fingers gripped them too tightly. Sometimes I look at them and wonder why I was warned at all. Maybe whoever wrote them just couldn't say everyone. Or maybe I was only one step away from being the next person nobody ever spoke about again. I joined that cruise because it was cheap. Just something my friends and I thought would be fun. A last-minute college trip, nothing fancy. We didn't care about luxury, only about getting away for a while, splitting the cost, and pretending we were grown-ups. The ship looked older than we expected, its paint dull, its metal railings spotted with rust. But we laughed it off, taking photos like it was all part of the adventure. The first couple of days were fine. Sunshine, crowded buffets, and endless lines for drinks. I spent most of that time with my roommate, Leah, who never seemed to sit still. She dragged me up and down the decks, chasing sunsets and telling me how strange the air felt. "Something's coming," she said once, staring at the horizon. I told her she was being dramatic. We were young, and I didn't believe anything truly bad could happen to us. But everything changed on the third night. Dinner had just ended when the intercom crackled to life, cutting through the noise of chatter and clinking dishes. The captain's voice sounded calm, but his words weren't. A storm had shifted course. It wasn't supposed to cross our path, but now it was heading straight for us. Some people laughed nervously, thinking it was just a routine warning, but the crew's faces told another story. Their smiles were tight, their eyes darting. Leah gave me a look that said, "I told you so." And for the first time, I felt it too. that thick, sinking dread settling into my stomach. By midnight, the ship wasn't gliding anymore. It was groaning like something alive and afraid. Each wave hit us hard, a force that made the whole vessel shudder as if the sea itself wanted to swallow us whole. The hallways began to tilt, plates shattered somewhere below us, and the whole ship rattled like it was trying to tear itself apart. The lights flickered again and again before going out completely. Leah, Vingus in total darkness. Imagine hundreds of people stumbling blindly, screaming, while the sound of rushing water filled the air and the metal walls moaned with every wave. I gripped the railing outside our cabin so hard my fingers went numb, sure the next hit would rip the ship in two. Leah and I tried moving toward the stairwell, but the floor was pitching so violently that we kept sliding and crashing into the walls. People were yelling names, sobbing, or just screaming as the ship groaned around us. A crew member ran by with a flashlight, shouting orders no one could hear over the roar of the storm. Then I smelled salt before I felt it, cold seawater pushing under cabin doors, spreading fast across the carpet. We finally reached a railing on one of the main decks, joining a crowd of terrified passengers clinging to anything that didn't move. The ship tilted so far that the horizon outside looked wrong, almost vertical, like the whole sea was standing up to crush us. Each time a wave hit, the floor shook and the metal screamed, a sound that made my stomach twist. I grabbed Leah's arm so tightly she cried out, but neither of us dared to let go. It felt like that railing was the only thing keeping us alive. The blackout dragged on, broken only by faint emergency lights that flickered weakly, casting ghostly glows over pale faces. Somewhere deeper in the ship, alarms wailed, then stopped. Everything else was chaos and darkness and the sound of water hammering at the walls. I kept thinking about the safety drills they'd shown us days before, how they hadn't prepared us for this. There were no instructions for standing in pitch-black corridors while the ship was being tossed around like a toy. Every minute stretched endlessly, the sound of the sea like a countdown to the end. Time stopped meaning anything. It felt like we'd been standing there for hours, the metal grates oaning, the deck shifting under our feet, the screams fading into exhaustion. Leah whispered that we weren't going to make it. I didn't argue. I just leaned my forehead against the cold railing and listened to the endless rhythm of water slamming and pulling away. Slam, recede, slam, recede, like it was waiting for the final blow. My thoughts drifted to my parents, to home, to how stupid it was to take this trip just to save a bit of money. No one on land knew what was happening to us, and that thought made me feel smaller than I'd ever felt. When the storm finally began to die, it wasn't slow. It was sudden, like the ocean had finally taken a breath and gone still. The violent crashes softened to dull tremors. The roaring faded into uneasy silence, and for a moment, no one moved. The air was heavy and wet, the kind of quiet that feels fragile, like one wrong sound could start it all again. Then the emergency lights came back, weak but steady this time, revealing faces that looked drained and ghostly. People clung to each other, shivering, whispering prayers. We were still floating, but it didn't feel like safety, more like we were being allowed to exist for a little longer. I let go of the railing and felt pain rush through my arms, every muscle screaming from holding on so long. Crew members appeared again, shouting directions and leading us back inside. The hallways were flooded ankle-deep, doors bent out of shape, belongings floating like wreckage. Leah and I pushed into our cabin, finding everything destroyed. The beds flipped, the ceiling dripping, the air thick with salt and oil that burned our throats. We didn't even try to sleep. I sat up all night, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the ship to start shaking again. The next morning, they told us the storm had changed direction so suddenly that the captain had no choice but to face it head-on. Some passengers called him a fool. Others said he'd saved us. None of it mattered to me. What Mum added was that the ship had survived, barely, and that I had looked into the full rage of the sea and somehow lived through it. I remember standing on the deck at sunrise, watching the calm golden horizon like the night before had been a nightmare I'd dreamed. But the twisted railings and broken glass around us proved it had all been real. Even now, years later, I still feel that night in my bones whenever I hear strong winds or buildings creak during a storm. It isn't just the fear that stayed. It's that helplessness, the reminder that we are nothing compared to what nature can do. That trip was supposed to be cheap and carefree, just another silly college adventure. Instead, it became the memory that still wakes me up at night, of gripping cold metal in the dark, waiting for the ocean to decide if I deserve to live.